Bright QT. Every student matters.
Hello, dear students. Welcome to another lecture. In this class, we are going to begin with Unit 9 of Class 12 Education Nagaland Board, which is Memory and Forgetting. Now, at the end of this unit, each one of us is going to be thorough with the term memory. We'd have understood what is memory, what is the nature of memory, what are the different factors that affect memory, how do we identify whether a person has a good memory or not. If not, what are the possibilities and ways to improve one's memories? And also understand the meaning as well as the causes of forgetting. So, we all know memory is something which is a very common term that each one of us makes use of in everyday lives. If we ask you about the name of your favorite actor, actress, movie, singer, within milliseconds you're going to answer that. But if we ask you something which is, let's say, related to a subject that you are not very fond of, you probably would not be able to answer that question with ease. So, all these things that we are able to remember and do not forget them over a long period of time is all because of our memory. So, our memory, the memory of a human being, has got a lot of potential. It is capable of remembering things for a long period of time. At times, there are people whose memory is so strong and so sharp that even after years, you don't forget the intricate details of a few incidents that probably took place 10 or 15 days back. So we all understand how important or what role memory plays in our life. Memory, having a good memory is important because it basically keeps you connected with your experiences. Whatever experiences you have had, your memory is going to make you remember that and continue your life ahead with it. So those experiences will move ahead with you in your life. They will keep on flowing with your life. This is why it is important to have a memory. Let us discuss about some of the definitions which are given about memory by some of the famous psychologists. So Stout believes that memory means this ideal revival, so far as ideal revival is merely reproductive. Thinking about something, some past experience which made you to refresh your brain, which made you to remember that in your mind for a very long time, just because it was a reproductive, it was a good thing to remember, not anything bad. We tend to forget both voluntary as well as involuntarily, to forget the things which are very sad or painful. But things which are productive, which are important, which are crucial for us, we tend to remember them and we tend to keep them in our mind. So this object, we are going to keep this in our mind only when we've had a past experience of something. So when something happened with you in your past and that was good and that was pleasant and that was happy, you are going to revive that at every step in your life. Next, according to James Trevor, memory is that characteristic which underlines all the learning. Whatever you have learned throughout your life, you are going to remember that and it is going to reflect in your behavior. You're going to recall, and every time you do something which probably would remind you of a similar situation in the past, you're going to recognize that, you're going to remember that as well. According to Woodworth and Marquis, Memory is a mental power which consists of learning. So, memory means you are able to learn something. You are able to retain something in your mind, keep something in your mind, and remember that throughout. Rayburn believes that the power that we have to store our experiences and to bring them into the field of consciousness sometimes after the experience have occurred. So, whatever experiences you have had in your lives, when you store those experiences and you bring them forth, you think about them, at small and short intervals, that is known as memory. Next, according to Guilford, memory is the retention or the storage of information in any form. So when you're able to retain or you're able to store some information in your brain, that is what is known as memory. So these were a few definitions, which were given by memory. About memory. We have Fiedestal as well, who believes that memory is the ability to retain and reproduce impressions once perceived. So, something that you have already perceived in life, something that you have already had, gone through in life, when you retain that, you store that in your mind and you reproduce it. You keep on remembering and recalling it whenever required. That is memory. Now, we have understood so far from all the definitions of the psychologists that memory means the special ability of our mind to store what we have learned through some past experiences, to recollect, to remember something and to reproduce it, to present it after some time. So, in all, it is a very complex process. You need to learn things in the first place. Unless and until you learn, there is not going to be anything that you can remember out of it. After you have learned something, you need to retain in your mind, you need to keep that stored in your mind. You need to recall that, remember that when the time arises, and then you recognize the similar situation or problem. So these experiences that we go through in our lives and they impact us, they leave an effect on our lives in one way or the other are known as schemas. Okay. Now, how well and for how long are we able to store something in our mind basically decides and determines the strength and the quality of how good those experiences were. If the experiences that we were talking about were good and pleasant, we would want to retain them in our brain for a long time. However, things which were painful and hurt you and bothered you, you would want to get rid of them. So, for how long are we able to retain something depends on the kind of experiences, the kind of traces that we've had. So, now we understand what is memory. Let us discuss about the factors that affect memory. What are the factors that are going to affect the memory you have? There are 4 factors of memory. We have registration, also known as learning, retention, recall, and recognition. Now, we shall learn about each of these factors at length. The first factor was registration or learning. Now, we understand very well, as I told you, unless and until you have learned something, you will not be able to retain that. Let's take, for example, I want to learn all the details of the historical leaders, let's say, or the political leaders, or let's say the freedom fighters who helped us achieve freedom in our country. I will be able to remember about them. I will be able to keep these details about the freedom fighters in my memory only once I have learned about them. I cannot expect just to hold a paper in my hand and just glancing it, keeping it aside and hoping that now I've got a photographic memory. So whatever I have seen is imprinted here. No. We'll have to learn first. We'll have to first acquire information from whatever experience we go through. Once we acquire information, only then we are going to associate them with the ideas of our current life. And therefore, unless and until we learn, we acquire, we gather the information, we will not be able to retain that. And learning is something that cannot take place with a click of a finger. It takes time, because to learn in such a way that you are able to remember what you have learned is going to certainly take time. So that means you first have to learn, which is a time consuming process. Once you learn, you are going to establish whatever association you could derive out of the different ideas or the ideologies you got from what you have learned. Now, the second factor, now we have learned, okay. So we've decided that we are going to learn first. We understand that it is important for us to learn. Now there are a couple of ways in which the learning can take place. So the learning can take place in 5 ways, 5 methods in which we can learn something. The first method is rote memorization. Rote memorization means learning without understanding. Just cramming whatever is given to you on the sheet of paper. It can be sensible, it can be nonsense, whatsoever it may be. But to just learn something is what rote memorization means. Whether you've understood it or not does not matter. However, rote memorization, we've understood, is a very mechanical method. You simply have to learn, do not understand anything at all. So one should always avoid doing that. But for rote memorization also, for a person, it is easy to remember a group of words which are associated together. According to psychology, it is easy to remember a poem than a prose. Okay, a poetry is easy to remember than an entire story. Then a prose, a proper story, is easy to remember as compared to a group of words which have got no connection with them. These group of words which have got no connection to them are again easy to learn than words which are nonsense at all and do not make any sense. Therefore, even when we have to rote memorize something, the logical sequence of the same is very important, and the idea should be very systematically arranged for you to understand that well. So this was the first way in which we can learn something. The second method of learning is spaced versus mass learning. Now, spaced learning in itself is suggestive of the fact that there is a gap when you learn. Okay? So, spaced learning means that once you are trying to learn something, you are allowed to take some rest in between. The person who is learning has got no obligation to continue learning at a continuous rate. Intervals are allowed. So, spaced learning follows the principle of work and rest. You learn something, you put yourself to work. After you have learned, you take a rest. This will help you to relax yourself and to retain what you've learned in your mind for a longer duration. However, mass learning means when you are supposed to memorize whatever material is assigned to you at one sitting. You sit, and even if the assignment is 10 pages long, without rest, without break, you will have to learn it unless and until you have mastered it, unless and until you've learned it accurately well. Now, spaced learning obviously is something that we follow for the students, for the kids who are slow learners, who are young, because for them it is very important that some gap, some rest should be given to them because the content for them might seem to be very difficult. So one needs to have some gap in the studies. This is what spaced learning aims at. This concept of spaced learning is very well evident in our timetables also. 2 periods academic we have, let's say we give you a break of 10 minutes so that you can have your fruit, talk to your friends, have a biscuit or something like that. The third period that you have is, let's say, games or, art, music, dance, something like this. Then again, you study for your fourth and the fifth period, and then you have your recess. You get time to rejuvenate yourself in your recess. Since you're fresh enough, you again have an academic period after your recess. Since you've studied, we give you a break, and let's say you have a period which you enjoy, something related to puppetry, something related to learning how to make a PowerPoint presentation, or something which gives you a hands-on training. So this is the concept of spaced learning. On the other hand, for mass learning, one needs to devote time at length, and one has to be very intelligent or very motivated that you will have to study no matter what. Only then can you expect yourself to be a mass learner. Okay, so this was the difference between spaced learning and the mass learning. Then comes whole versus part method of learning. Now again, it is very simple. From the topic only we are able to understand. Part method means if a teacher wants you to learn a poetry, let's say, for example, rather than asking you to learn the whole poem altogether, she'd tell you to learn the first and the second stanza for today. She is going to revise that in the class the next day by asking you to repeat what you have learned. And then she asks you to learn the remaining 2 stanzas for the following day. So this way, 2 stanzas one day and 2 stanzas 2 days. Second day, you were able to join whole and learn it entirely. On the other hand, as the word suggests, whole learning is when obviously there is no possibility for you to break what you have to learn in parts, and you have no other option but to learn whatever is given to you together. This can only be done when you are motivated enough, when you are smart enough, and you understand what is the relevance of what you are learning, and only then you will have this sense of responsibility to learn it all together. The next method of learning is recitation. Recitation means to repeat what you have learned. For the slow learners, for the young learners, for example, this concept is very much practiced. You can see your teachers saying something and asking you to repeat after them. Why is this practiced? Because this method is considered to be a very powerful tool of enabling you to learn. When you are repeating something again and again, you are able to master it, you are able to retain that yourself in your mind. Repeating of poetries, repeating of the spellings, repeating of the words, and so on and so forth. So, obviously, with recitation, since you are repeating something again and again, there are very strong chances of you to retain that, to keep that in your mind for a longer duration, for a permanent duration. The next method of learning is mnemonic devices. If you remember in the last unit when we talked about learning, we talked about all the mnemonic styles of learning, where we had social, individual, we had oral, visual, logical, these were the different techniques that can be used by a teacher. At times, a combination of these techniques can also be used in order to ensure that the student is able to learn and retain something in mind. So, you are going to learn something which will be there in your mind. You are going to be able to memorize the things easily. Okay, you are going to find it easy, though it is going to be just a verbatim. You are simply speaking and learning, no understanding takes place. But this is again one of the methods of learning. So the first technique of or the first factor of memory was to learn, and we had 5 factors of learning. The second factor of memory is retention. Just a second. Yes. So the second factor of memory is retention. What do we mean by retention? Retention means that process, that state of our mind when what we have learned stays in our brain. It leaves a mark in our brain, it leaves a trace in our brain, and the learning leaves an impact on the cerebral cortex. So our entire nervous system is getting affected with it. This is because what we have learned has remained permanently, has established itself permanently in our brain. Now, one can preserve, one can keep such things in their memory only and only when what they want is something which is memorable, which is worth remembering. Now, for example, if I say, yes, something that you want to learn, but you're not ready to devote much time to it, would you be able to keep that in your mind for long? No, you won't. So, if you want to retain something in your brain, you will have to repeat that, or you will have to devote more time to it, and only after you've devoted more time would you be able to keep that in your mind forever. However, if you just spent 5 minutes on some chapters, you'd not be able to understand a word about it. So, the more the time spent by you on something, the better retention that will have in your. Now, memory can be improved also. There are possibilities for you to retain something in your mind if some external factors, if some ways are followed. So, 3 ways in which one can measure the retention or can change the retention, capability that one has are recall, recognition, and relearn. The 3 R's that we have. Recall means we have already learned something and now you are recalling that. For example, when your exams are conducted, when you are assessed for your written tests by your teacher, the teacher has already given you the syllabus for the paper. The time duration that you have before you appear for that exam has also been given to you. Now, the only thing that you have to do is to learn. And after you have learned, when the paper comes in front of you, you have to recall all that you have learned and then you write your answers. So we can obviously not, measure how much we have recalled. We cannot say that. Therefore, recalling something is not that good a source of retention because what we've learned cannot be tested. It cannot be measured. It cannot be objectified. The second method that can measure retention is recognition. Now, recognition is something that we do nowadays. When you have your papers, you have multiple choice questions in front of you, right? Now, recognition means you have learned something now. We have already learned. Without learning, nothing is going to take place. This is something we have to be prepared with. So, we have to learn After learning, when we sit for an assessment, when we sit for a paper, we come across questions in which there are 4 options available in front of us, and we have to select the best option, the correct option. Now, out of the 4 options, when you have to choose the correct one, you have to recognize which is the correct answer based on your learning. You don't have to think altogether of an answer, but the answer is already there in front of you. You simply have to recognize that. So this method is obviously widely used by the teachers, by the instructors to measure how much a child has been able to retain in their mind what they have learned. And the last method to measure our retention is to relearn something. Now, we might not be able to recall something. The first attempt when I sat for giving a paper, it failed. I was not able to recall anything at all. I was not even able to recognize anything. So what? I can always relearn that. Now, relearning, although, means that since you are going to learn something that you've already learned in the previous days, in the previous week, or let's say even previous month, you will be able to pick that up, you will be able to understand that better when you sit and learn it again. So, when you are asked to learn something for the first time, and when you are set to learn something for the second or the third time, there is going to be an improvement that will be certainly seen in the learner, because when we relearn, we are able to pick up the words, we are able to pick up and get a better hand on our learning practices as compared to earlier. And if you relearn properly, there are very strong chances for you to not forget what you've learned for months. And obviously, when you are relearning, you are going to be able to answer everything well, because it has been a double learning for you now. So you'll take less time, you'll take less efforts to produce what you have already learned. So these were the 3 factors with the help of which we can measure retention. Now the third factor of memory is recall, the major head of recall. So what does recall means? The presentation of whatever past experiences you have had. Let's say you must have seen this. You go to a place after, let's say, 10 years. So you were born in some town, and now that you are 15 years of age, you go back to the same town again. Since you've spent a considerable, amount of time in that town, you are going to be able to recall the place. Looking at the houses, looking at the shops, looking at the river, the trees, the huts, let's say, the bridges, all these things are going to help you to recollect, to just recall all that has already happened with you earlier. The moment you go to that place again, all the old memories are going to come back to you. They are going to be altogether fresh in your mind. The example in your book is of a car, that if you come across a car that you know who it belongs to, but you had forgotten the name of that person. The moment that car will come in front of you again, you'd be able to remember, you'd be able to recall. How well we are able to recall will depend on how strong our mental condition is and how strongly that thing left an impact in our brain. There might be things which happen with us which we do not pay any attention to. So such things will never be able to recollect it, to be able to recollect it by us. The last factor of memory is recognition. Recognition means when you are able to be aware of your previous experiences. Okay? When you are able to recognize somebody or something. Let's say your uncle who lives in United States, you were very young when he went there. You were hardly 3 years of age when you went there. But for those 3 to 4 years that he was with you, you had wonderful memories with him. He loved you, he played with you, he treated you like his own child, and you had a gala time with him. Now, after 10 years, that uncle visited you again. And because of your wonderful past experiences with that uncle, you were able to recognize him instantly. So, this is what we understand by recognition. Okay. Now, basically, recognition means when you develop the familiarity towards something, you understand that you are familiar to this person because of your experience from some previous occasion. Now you must be wondering, recall also I gave you a similar example, and recognition also I have given you a similar example. Now recall means something which remains in your memory, while recognition means either you can accept that or you can reject that. In recall, you do not have a choice to get that disappeared from your mind. If I go back to that village, let's see, even if I was not happy being in that village, just because I have been there, I am going to think of all the times I have spent in that village. On the other hand, when we talk about recognition, recognition gives you the power to accept or to reject something. If I want, if I've had some good experiences with somebody, I'd be able to recognize them because I would want them to be fresh in my mind. However, if my experiences were not that good, they were not that pleasant, I would not recognize. I would just, that person, that thing, that place would altogether disappear from my brain. So in recall, you do not have this possibility, while in recognition, you do. So these are the 4 factors of memory. Now, after the factors of memory, let us talk about the types of memory. We have got 3 types of memory, to be precise. We have immediate memory, we have short-term memory, and we have long-term memory. The name in itself are suggestive of the 3 types of memories that we are going to discuss about. Immediate memory is also known as short-term memory, but it simply means that you have seen something, you have learned something, you got very less time to remember something, and you have to reproduce that. For example, let's say a phone number. You are supposed to dial somebody's phone number. You have the number in your phone, and let's say we do not have that option of copying and pasting it in the dial menu. Okay. So you look at the phone number and then we just learn it, within seconds, 96543712, whatever. And we type it, we dial it. The moment that is dialed, we are going to forget that number again. We are not going to remember. So since we were exposed to learning for a very small period of time, therefore, what we have learned is not going to remain in our memory for long. We are going to lose that immediately. Again, they have given the example of a ticket number. You went for a movie, on entering the hall, you know that the person who checks your ticket is going to ask you what is your seat number. So you look at your ticket, you tell him that my seat number is, let's say, H12. The moment you sit on your seat, you're going to just forget about it because it is of no relevance to you later on. You are not going to do anything by remembering the seat number in the long run. So this is what immediate memory is all about. Then we have the short-term memory. Short-term memory is also known as temporary memory. Obviously, this is not as short-term as the immediate memory was, but yes, the short-term memory may just be in your brains for as long as 30 seconds of exposure to that thing. You are rehearsing something, they've again given the example of a number, let's say. If you have to learn some address, for example, you're writing a letter to somebody, you are remembering the address, and the address, the number, the house number is too big for you to learn at once. What will you do? You're going to break that in small, small parts, and then you are going to remember it, you're going to learn it. Once you've learned it, you are going to write it wherever you want it to, and then it is up to you whether you want to retain it or you want to just let it go. Since again, it has got nothing to do with you personally, you would obviously tend to forget that. However, when we talk about the long-term memory, it is something which is known as the permanent memory. One is able to learn, is able to store that information in one's brain for a very long period of time. There are multiple ways in which long-term memory is, targeted, is triggered. We give you time between your learnings, we give you time to recall, we give you time to produce that. And once you have remembered, you are going to remember it forever. Your phone number, your account number, your house address, the phone number of your mother, your father, and so on and so on. So these were the three stages of memory that we talked about. Memory is something which is not single. It has got a distinct and a diverse system in itself. You're going to first learn something, then that learning is going to be stamped in your mind. You're going to recollect something, after some time, recognize something, and this is how the process unfolds. So, the entire process, of memory can be divided into three stages. We've already discussed about that: the sensory memory, the short-term memory, and the long-term memory. So these are the different stages of memory. Now, according to the psychologists, now this is the entire structure. According to the psychologists, if there is a sensory memory that we talk about, let's say, you had to remember the ticket number, for example, right? Learning a ticket number for yourself and being seated on your seat was okay, and you had the possibility of forgetting that altogether. But there may be a possibility that the ticket number you will have to remember because a friend is going to join you in the movie hall, right? You will have to tell your friend on phone what is the ticket number that you have. So you keep that ticket number in your mind for a long time until your friend calls. Your friend calls, let's say 2 minutes or 3 minutes later. So that memory, which could have been a sensory memory or an immediate memory, stayed in your brain for 2 to 3 minutes. So it became a short-term memory. Okay. Let's say either you can forget after your friend has joined you, there is a possibility of you to, forget that. Or what can happen is, if you think that you will have to go home and you find the seat that you sat on very comfortable, and you would want that when your parents are coming over the next day to watch the movie, you want to book them the same seats. So you're going to rehearse that in your mind again and again, and that becomes a part of your long-term memory. Now again, there is a possibility for you either to forget. Once you have booked seats for your parents, you can again forget that. So, a sensory memory or an immediate memory, when kept in your mind for a long time, for a comparatively long time, becomes a short term memory. When it is rehearsed one after the other, it becomes a part of the long term memory as well. Let us now read what we have already understood. So, sensory memory, as I said, they have given another example that will help you to understand the sensory memory better. So, hold any object 12 inches in front of you. Okay, look at it and then just remove it from yourself. Just remove it from in front of you. You're going to close your eyes and you're going to try and remember about the object that you just saw. Since the object was in front of you for only a half second, or let's say 1 second or 2 seconds, you will be able to retain the information on that paper for a very, very brief period of time, right? Because your sense organs obviously take longer to adjust to something, to adapt something, to accept something. While what was offered to you was a paper in front of you for a very short period of time, so your sense organs did not get accustomed to it. Now come the stage of the short term memory. Now the same paper that was there in front of you was brought in front of you now, and now it was kept in front of you for a comparatively longer period, let's say 30 seconds or 40 seconds of time. This time, when it was in front of you for a comparatively long duration, you were able to retain some information out of it for a better period of time, for a comparatively longer period of time. Okay, so this is going to be there with you. Now you've learned something and you are able to remember it. You use it, you answer the questions to your teachers. However, if what you've learned from the short term memory, if you keep on rehearsing that, repeating that, it changes to a long term memory. And what is a long term memory? Obviously, something which remains in your memory for a long period of time. It is that memory which will help you to remember something that took place years ago. Maybe something that took place when you were in a school in grade 5, or even yesterday, or last year, or whatsoever the case may be. So, this is what we understand by the sensory memory, short term memory, and the long term. Now, when we are paying attention to the information, that is in front of you, obviously, if that information is in front of you for a long duration, that becomes a part of your long term memory. We've already talked about it. Your attention is very much on that. The reason why it became a part of your long term memory was because of your attention, because of your focus. So, if we do not pay any attention to such a thing, it remains sensory. If we pay some attention to it for a couple of more seconds, it becomes short term. And if we continue to rehearse it and repeat it, it transfers to LTM, that is the long term memory. And therefore, rehearsal or repetition of something will transfer a data from short term to the long term memory. Okay? Now, how do we know that a person has a good memory? What are the signs that will help us think of a person possessing a good memory? When a person can easily and quickly learn something, that shows that the memory of a person is very good. Something which is not learned entirely will never remain in your brain longer. So if something is learned by you on a whole, rapidly and quickly, that means you have a good memory. It is a clear sign of that. Somebody, who can retain whatever information they have gathered, the maximum amount of their information, they are able to keep them in mind. Again, that shows that the person has a good memory. Another sign of a good memory is when a person is able to recall. is able to recollect whatever they had learned, even with the help of some image, with the help of some sign language, with the help of some television serial, with the help of some radio broadcast, or anything for that matter. But if you are able to recall and recollect what you have already learned, that again shows that your memory is good. Next sign of a good memory is you are able to quickly and clearly recognize things and people. So that means whatever you have learned remained in your brain for a long time, and that is how you were able to recall that. And next, obviously, if we know how can we recollect and how can we utilize all that we have learned in the most relevant, in the most appropriate manner. If I say again, as I have already told you, one tends to remember those things which were good and pleasant and forget those which were painful and which hurt you. So one if a person can recollect, can recognize, can remember things which were helpful, which were nice and pleasant, then that means the person has a good memory, as well as if a person knows what things to retain and what things to just, let disappear from yourself, again, it is a sign of good memory. So we know how, what are the factors of memory. We have learned that registration or learning, retention, recall, recognition, these are all the different factors of memory. We also know what are the different signs which will indicate that a person has a good memory. But what if somebody does not have a good memory? What are we going to do in that case? We have the possibility for improvement of memory as well. There are few techniques, there are few ways that will help you to improve your memory. Now, what are those techniques? What are the ways in which we can improve our memory? I am going to discuss with you in the next lecture. Now, we all by now have understood the importance and the relevance of having a good memory. So, if we don't feel that our memory is that good and still feel the possibility of improving that, what are the possible ways in which the same can be worked upon? So, we have discussed the factors already: registration or learning, recall, retention, as well as the recognition. So now, as I told you, there are ways in which we can improve our memory. There are a few techniques, there are a few methods, there are a few training modules that can help you to improve your memory. Your memory can improve because of the kind of learning situation and environment you are exposed to, as well as the state of mind of a learner. Whether when the learner is told to learn something, he or she is in the correct frame of mind or not. So all these are actually the major factors that decide whether and how much the memory of a person can be improved. Now we are going to discuss a few tips that will help you to improve your memory. The first one is your intention to learn. Now, as the name is suggestive of the fact, intention means willingness, determination, desire. A person who has the desire, who is determined, who has the strength to learn, will learn and achieve success no matter what the situation may be. Whatever material is given to such a person, whatever conducive environment is given to this person, since this person has a strong willingness to learn, he is going to find a way out. On the contrary, somebody who does not want to learn, if somebody is given some topic that does not interest him or her, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you apply the reinforcement techniques, no matter how many different styles of learning you adopt, the person is not going to learn. And even if he or she ends up learning, that learning is going to be a short term learning and would not be able to retain in their minds. So those who have the the determination to learn, who have the desire to learn, will be able to learn better, quicker, and will have longer retention. And those who do not have the willingness or the intention to learn will not be able to learn anything, no matter how good the situation be. And even if they do, the retention power of the same is going to be very, very less. The second way in which one can improve the memory is by deep processing. Now, obviously, if you want to learn something, if we are making an effort to learn something, if we are spending time on learning something, we would want that learning to enter our long-term memory. We would want to retain that in the long duration. So, if we want that to happen, it is very important for us to analyze what we are learning in depth. We have to understand the meaning of the concept that we wish to learn. We have to understand why is it important for me to to learn what I want to. Then I will have to plan my time, my schedule accordingly. And then only I can expect that the learning is going to enhance and is going to get better. It is going to retain in my memory and I'd be able to learn it in the later stages. So basically, how well you are able to keep something in your memory will depend directly upon how much time you have devoted. And time devoted does not mean just sitting with your book for 12 hours and still not being able to learn anything. No. It means how much deeply you have been able to analyze the topic, understand the topic, and derive the meaning out of that. So, if you delve deeper into the topic and try and get your basics clear, whatever you are learning is going to be retained in your brain. If you rehearse, if you recap whatever you have learned, again, that recapitulation is going to again make sure that your memory, whatever you are learning, gets stayed in your memory for a longer duration. So you have to learn, you have to get into the topic deeply and also recap, rehearse, and repeat that. The third way in which we can increase and improve our memory is by interest and attention. Unless and until we are interested in learning what we want to, our brain will never allow us to focus and pay attention to it. So, interest and attention are very essential tools for learning, and then to ensure that the same is, kept in your memory for long. If you want to learn something, if you have if you have a keen interest in the topic that you have taken up for learning, you will pay attention to it, you will focus on it, you are going to find the facts which are even not there in the book which you are trying to learn from. And this ways it is going to be there in your memory. And as it is said by the psychologist, interest is the mother of attention and attention is the mother of memory. If you would secure memory, you would first catch the mother and then the grandmother. So the psychologists believe that interest is the mother and attention is the grandmother. If you want to have a good memory, you will first have to get the mother. That is, you will have to first develop an interest in the topic that you want to learn. And then you have to catch the grandmother. That is, whatever topic you are interested in, you have to pay utmost attention to it so that you can secure it in your brain. So this is how interest and attention can help you retain something in your mind for a longer duration. And this is why interest plays such an important role. And interest is again something which lies in a person. You cannot create it. It is not an external factor that can be created in one when somebody tells you that this topic is interesting. No, unless and until you yourself find that interesting, you would not be able to learn. Then comes minimize interference. Now, interference, we all know the external factors that might lead to some disturbance, that might add on to, the forgetting part of what you are learning. So basically, whenever you sit down for learning, whenever you sit down for preparing for your exams or anything which is important to you, you have to remember that there should not be any interference at all. First, the external interference should be as less as possible. There should not be any external forces like noise of the television, of the radio that is causing a problem with your studies. And secondly, what is more important is the fact that if one day you have devoted to studying, let's say, both English as well as education, if you study both the subjects one after the other without keeping a gap, everything is going to get muddled up in your head and you'll not be able to remember either of the two topics you have learned. So it is always better that if you are taking up two different subjects, then you should take them on two different days as well. And even if you want to take up two subjects on one day, there should be spaced learning that is taking place. Remember, we've talked about spaced learning. So you have to manage your, curriculum, your schedule in such a manner that there is a gap. Once you are done with English, you need to give yourself some rest so that your memory can absorb everything that has gone into it related to English. And only then you should proceed with your other subject, let's say education. The next way of improving your memory is distributed practice. This is something we all know. Anything, when distributed properly, evenly, and sensibly, is going to be better as compared to something which is all muddled up and which is all intermingled with each other. So, whenever you are learning, you have to distribute your learning schedule. You learn a topic, you revise it at length, then you make sure that you appear for a test, let's say, or you go through some of the questions, that will make sure that the topic that you have covered is clear to you or not. If the topic is lengthy, divide that topic in small parts. Cover first part first, try and recapitulate it, attempt the questions based on the first part, then proceed to the second part. And always remember that cramming is never going to help you. If you continue to cram the information, you will not be able to memorize that because it will only be there in your memory for a short term. You'll not be able to recall it at the later stages. Next that we have is using the memory aids. Aids means those things which can help you in learning and memorizing things better. For example, if you are learning something, when we go to a new place altogether, let's say I went to my maternal grandmother's place. I have been there for the first time. On coming back home, somebody asked me, where does your grandmother live? I did not know the address because I had been there for the first time. But the only thing that made me remember of the place was a mall which was next to it. So I remembered the name of the mall and I explained and told the other person that my grandmother's house is exactly near to it, opposite to it, behind to it, or whatsoever the case may be. So such cues, such indicators, such signals will always help us remember. So when you are learning something, you can always make use of a visual image that will help you to understand that better. If let's say you are learning in history about a war, okay, so try and visualize that in your brain in a proper sequence. So this ways it will be easier for you to learn that and keep that in your mind and then produce it on paper when the need be. So such aids will always help you retain something better in your mind. Next is the shorthand codes. Shorthand, we all know, is basically, a process wherein people are taught and trained in making a shortcut or, a sign or an abbreviated form of something. Because these people who are trained with shorthand, they have to take notes. And if you have to take notes, you cannot keep on writing each and every sentence, each and every line, each and every word. This ways you'd never be able to take the complete notes. So shorthand means that you have to make your own code so that you can memorize things which you want to. For example, VIBGYOR is the short form of violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. So VIBGYOR, we say the rainbow has a VIBGYOR. This is how we remember the colors of the rainbow and also the order of the same. Okay. Then another example which is given in your book is to remember the Mughal rulers. Okay, Bhajsa, Bhadsa. So B is for Babur, A is for Humayun, Akbar, then Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. This is how they ruled in sequence. So such codes can be developed by you if you have to remember something which has a proper sequence. You can, use such codes, make such codes of your own, and will help you remember them for a longer duration. The next one is obviously meaningfulness. Unless and until you have understood what you are trying to learn, you will never be able to learn it for a long duration. If we do not understand what is there in front of us, we are going to forget it for sure. So always try and get through the meaning of the topic or the subject or the content that you are trying to read, and this will help you retain it for a longer duration. Next, we have grouping and rhythm. Now, grouping and rhythm, again, it helps you to remember something which is long, which is lengthy. If you have to learn the tables, let's say, what do? We group them. Okay, 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8, and so on and so forth. We keep on reciting them, repeating them again and again. If there is a phone number that we want the child to learn for the first time, we will always teach that number to the child in small, small groups. Maybe the first 3 digits first, the next 3 digits next, and the last 4 digits later. Also, like we have seen poetry, when you try to learn a poetry, since a poetry has got stanzas, you will probably learn the first stanza first, then recite it, repeat it so that you are able to retain that. Then we learn the second stanza, again we pause, remember it, and so on and so forth. We move to all the further stanzas again. So, when we group things together, when we speak something in a recitation form or in a repetition form, that is again a very important tool, a very useful tool that will help us to remember it for a long period. The next method is again repetition and recitation that we've already thrown light on in the 9th point. To repeat something, to continuously practice what you have already learned is going to add to your memory. If you repeat something in an intelligent manner, if you repeat something with understanding, again your learning is going to be very effective, it is going to be strong, and it is going to be there with you for a long time. Then, very important again, the internal factors within the learner. Unless and until you yourself want to learn, if you are physically well, you are mentally healthy, you are in the right and peaceful frame of mind that you can learn, your learning is going to be better and quicker. Somebody who's not eaten for 2 days, somebody who's not slept for 2 days is already going to be in a daze. And for such a person to learn something and to remember that thing for a long time is certainly not possible. The next factor Okay, yes. So, as we have been told, that internal factors play a very important role, and that is the reason why the schools focus on the all round development of the children. The physical health as well as the mental health of the child are equally important. The students are trained in such a manner that they should know how to have a control over their emotions, so that they would learn how to practice techniques which will help them grow. They are told to have regular and timely sleep so that they can be through with the tiredness and fatigue. They are always told to learn something with a fresh mind, because that ways they'd be able to learn better, quicker, and again that stays in their memory and becomes a long term memory. The last mode of improving one's memory is making use of the SQ4R technique. Now, these techniques were developed by Thomas Robinson. According to him, S stands for serving. If you want to learn something, you will first have to go through the material very quickly so that you can get an idea of what all you are going to remember. Okay? When you get your question paper, what do you do first? You just have a quick glance at your paper to know how many questions you have got. Right? That is the survey. Question. Here you need to ask yourself that why, what, when, where, or who is this concerning? Why are you learning this? How is it going to help you? What can be done by you to learn it better? So these questions need to be asked, and once you are clear with what this learning is going to lead you to, it will be easier for you to learn again. Then comes read. After you have surveyed it, after you have now decided why is it important for you to learn, you're going to read the material so that you can understand everything which is there. We read our question papers, we get time, devote time to read it. Then we reflect. We think about what all information is given in the material that we are trying to learn. We are going to reflect and think whether we have learned something similar earlier or not. We are going to decide, what all things can be done by us so that the learning can be quicker and easier. Then is recite and recall. Recite and recall is again, after you have learned, you're going to recite it, you're going to repeat it again and again so that you are able to recall it, not only orally but also in writing. And then the last but not the least is to review what you have learned. After you have learned everything, you have to revise that at the end as well. So this technique was known as SQ4R because S was survey, Q was question, and then we had 4Rs that we need to focus on, which is read, reflect, recite and recall, and review. So with this, my dear students, we come to the end of the first topic of your book, that is memory. I'm going to pause here now, and in my next lecture, we'll begin with the second topic, which is forgetting. So I'll see you all now in my next lecture. Thank you.